أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Assalamu alaikum, dear brothers and sisters, wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is our second lesson on the book Al-Mujaz Fi Ilm Al-Usul, a summary of the principles of jurisprudence by Ayatullah Sheikh Ja'far Al-Subhani. As I mentioned in the first session, this textbook is considered to be an introductory text, a primer into the science of Ilm Al-Usul. But I think for many people, for an English-speaking audience, this would probably be regarded as an intermediate level study of Ilm Al-Usul. So if you haven't studied any Ilm Al-Usul, I would recommend that you go to the Tasneem Institute website and you sign up for the course that I did called Introduction to Islamic Legal Theory. It's a 5-session course where I cover some of the fundamentals of this discipline, and I think that that would serve as a good introduction to the science of Ilm al-Usul. In our first session, we began with the introduction, and there are many sections within the introduction of this book. The first section was the definition of usul al-fiqh. Before we delve into this discipline, it's important for us to understand what exactly are we investigating when we delve into this science. What is the definition of fiqh? What is the definition of usul? So we spoke about that in detail. After we examined the definition, the term usul al-fiqh, we then moved on to the second section, which was essentially a survey of the subtopics that we cover in Ilm al-Usul. We looked, for example, at al-mabahith al-lafdhiyya. So the science of usul al-fiqh can be divided up into the following subtopics. You have al-mabahith al-lafdhiyya, linguistic discussions. We have al-mabahith al-aqliyya, rational discussions. We have mabahith al-hujaj wal-amarat, the discussion surrounding, what constitutes proof in fiqh. What are the proofs and the indications that are used to establish something. And then finally, the final section of usul al-fiqh is mabahith al-usul al-amaliyya, looking at the procedural principles that are to be followed when we don't have any ayah or hadith that give us any guidance on a particular subject. Now we come to the third section, al-amru al-thalith al-wضع. This section basically examines the phenomenon and the relationship that exists between words and their meanings. Now, as you know, brothers and sisters, in every language, you have many, many words. And these words, they signify specific meanings. Now, the question is, if we have all of these words, what created the relationship between a specific word and a specific meaning? Now, is this a natural relationship? Is this something that just occurred naturally? Or did it occur through a process of designation? And this is the meaning of وضع. He says, إن دلالة الألفاظ على معانيها دلالة لفظية وضعية. He says words signify their meanings in a way that has been designated for them. You see, words are signifiers, and the meanings are the things that are signified. And sometimes a signifier, a dilala, is verbal, and sometimes it's non-verbal. Now, what do we mean by this? If we take the example of smoke, smoke is a signifier. Smoke is what we can call dal. And smoke signifies the existence of what? Of fire. So smoke is the dal and fire is the madlul. Now the relationship between fire and smoke is a natural relationship. It's not something that was designated by people. It's something that is naturally occurring. Now, when it comes to words and their meanings, the relationship between a meaning and a word is not like the relationship between fire, smoke and fire. It's not something that happens naturally. It happens through a phenomenon known as wad', designation, or there's a coining. You coin a specific term to refer to a specific meaning. وَالْوَضْعُ قَدْ عُرِّفَ بِوُجُوهٍ أَوْضَحُهَا. Designation, wad', has been defined in many ways. And among the most well-known ways in which wad' has been defined is the following. جعل اللفظ في مقابل المعنى وتعيينه للدلالة عليه. He says that designation is defined as placing a word opposite a meaning. So you designate a term to refer to a specific meaning and specifying that it signifies that meaning. So for example, a designator, the wadi', will basically designate the word tree, and he will say that whenever I utter the word tree, I am referring to that vegetation or that external reality that has bark, a tree trunk, branches, and leaves. So I am designating the word tree to refer to that external reality. So the definition of wad' is to basically designate, to place a word opposite a meaning and specifying that it signifies that meaning. Now here, he says, وَرُبَّمَا يُعَرَّفْ. He says, there's another way of defining wad'. أنه نحو اختصاص لللفظ بالمعنى وارتباط خاص بينهما ناشئ من تخصيصه به تارة ويسمى بالوضع التعييني وكثرة استعماله فيه أخرى ويسمى بالوضع التعيني. He says here that another way of defining wad' is, we can say that it's a kind of specification of a meaning for a word and the special connection that arises between them. So you designate a word for a meaning, and then there exists a special connection between the word and the meaning. And sometimes this connection is established through intentional designation, بالوضع التعييني. So for example, you have a person or a group or a body of people, and they announce and they declare that the word tree refers to that external reality, that vegetation that grows from the earth, that has a tree trunk and branches and leaves. So sometimes designation is intentional. It's an intentional designation, بالوضع التعييني. And sometimes it doesn't work that way. Sometimes the special relationship that exists between a word and a meaning arises through spontaneous designation. وَيُسَمَّى بِالْوَضْعِ التَّعَيُّنِ. So it happened spontaneously. So no one came forward and declared that this word refers to that meaning. It happened organically. It happened spontaneously. An example that we can give. The city of the Prophet ﷺ is known as Medina. Now, prior to the advent of Islam, that city was known as Yathrib. Yathrib is the ancient name for the city of Medina. It was known as Yathrib. Now, after the hijrah of the Prophet, Yathrib, people started to call it Madinatul Rasul. They used to call it the city of the Prophet. And because of frequent usage and repetitive usage of that word, what happened was that Yathrib eventually became known as Medina, not even Madinatul Rasul. It became known as the city. The city, Medina. Now here, the word Medina has been designated to refer to that city that the Prophet took as his place of hijrah. But if you look at the history of Islam, no one stood up. There's no person or group of individuals that announced to the people that whenever we use the word Medina, we are referring to the ancient city of Yathrib. It didn't happen through intentional designation. It happened how? It happened بالوضع التعيني. It happened organically. It happened through a spontaneous designation that was the result of repetitive usage. والفرق بين التعريفين واضح. Sheikh Al-Subhani, he says, the difference between the first definition that we gave and the second definition is obvious. فإن الأول لا يشمل إلا التعيين. He says, when you look at the first definition that we gave, whereas you assign a word opposite of a meaning and you specify that the word refers to that meaning, the first definition only accounts for intentional designation. Whereas the second definition encompasses بخلاف الثاني فإنه أعم منه ومن التعين. The second definition is more encompassing. It includes, it speaks about this special connection between a word and a meaning, but it also highlights that this designation, this connection can be established through intentional designation or spontaneous designation. So the second definition is actually more comprehensive. It's more inclusive. Now, أقسام الوضع, the different types of designation. He says, ثم إن للوضع في مقام التصور أقساما أربعة. He says, when it comes to designation, from a conceptual perspective, there are four types of designation. The first is الوضع الخاص, where you have specific designation, والموضوع له الخاص, and the subject is also specific. So here basically we're saying specific word for specific meaning, specific designation for a specific subject. Number two, الوضع العام, general designation. A general designation, والموضوع له العام, and a general subject. The third is الوضع العام والموضوع له الخاص. The third is that you have a general designation, والموضوع له الخاص, and the subject is specific. And then number four is الوضع الخاص والموضوع له العام. You have a specific designation and the subject is general. Now, ثم إن الميزان في كون الوضع خاصا أو عاما هو كون المعنى الملحوظ حين الوضع جزئيا أو كليا. Now here, he says a designation is either specific or general depending on whether the meaning that is being considered is juz'i or kulli. So if the meaning that is being considered is juz'i, then it's going to be khas. If the meaning that is being considered, if it's kulli, if it's universal, then it's going to be am. Now, فإن كان الملحوظ خاصا ووضع اللفظ بإزائه فهو من القسم الأول. He says that if the meaning that is being considered is specific, and the term and the word that we coin and designate for that specific meaning, if that's also specific, then this is of the first type. فإن كان الملحوظ خاصا, if what is being considered is specific, and we designate a term to refer to that specific meaning, then this is of the first type, where you have specific designation for a specific subject. كوضع الأعلام الشخصية. And this is, an example of this is when we designate specific names that refer to specific individuals, like Zayd. You coin and you designate the word Zayd, which is a specific word, and this Zayd, it doesn't refer to just any Zayd. It refers to this specific Zayd who exists in front of me, for example. So this is where, think about, when you have a child born. When a child is born and you're the parent, you designate a specific word to refer to this specific child. So the designation is specific and the subject is specific. And this is what we see typically with proper names. وإن كان الملحوظ عاما ووضع اللفظ بإزائه. Now, if what is being considered is general, if we conceptualize of something general, and then we designate a general term to refer to that general concept, this is of the second type. فهو من القسم الثاني كأسماء الأجناس. It's like the name of that we give to different species. So for example, I'm thinking about something that is general, like the human being. The human being is a universal concept. I'm thinking about a general meaning, and that meaning is the human being. And then I designate a general word that refers to the general idea of being human. And I come up with the word insan. Insan is a general designation that refers to a general concept. This is of the second type. Al-Mawdu' له عام. So this is of the second type. الوضع العام والموضوع له العام. And then we have وإن كان الملحوظ عاما ولم يوضع اللفظ بإزائه بل وضع لمصاديق ذلك العام. Sometimes we consider a general meaning, but we don't designate a term that refers to that general meaning. We designate a specific term that acts as one of the instances of that general meaning. فهو من القسم الثالث. And this is of the third type. And what's an example of this? كالأدوات والحروف. This is like the particles and the prepositions in language. والحروف على ما هو المشهور. And this is a very popular example of the third type of designation. فالواضع على هذا القول تصور مفهومي الابتداء والانتهاء الكليين ثم وضع لفظة من وإلى لمصادقهما الجزئية التي يعبر عنها بالمعاني الحرفية. So here he says that an example of this is, imagine the وضع. The وضع here means the designator. Imagine someone thinks of, conceptualizes the general idea of beginning or end. Beginning is a general concept. End is a general concept. So I am thinking, I am considering a general meaning, but I'm not designating a general word to refer to that general meaning. Rather, I am designating a specific word that acts as an instance of that general meaning. Like when we designate the word min. The word min, it doesn't, so the word min acts as an instance of the general meaning of ibtida. So for example, if I say sirtu min al-Basra ila al-Kufa, that I traveled from Basra to Kufa. Sirtu min al-Basra, meaning the beginning of my departure, the beginning of my destination, my journey was in Basra. Now the word min was not designated, is not a general designation that refers to the meaning of beginning. It is designated for me to use in my specific situation. So when I conceptualize, when I consider the general meaning of ibtida, which means beginning, I designate a specific term, meaning that we don't designate the word min to refer to the general idea of ibtida. It's an instance of ibtida. So when I use the word min, which is a preposition, and I use the word ila, so when I say sirtu min al-Basra ila Baghdad, the word min means I began in Basra. Ila means my ending point. Now, when I consider the general meaning of ibtida and intiha, I'm not designating a general word. I'm designated a specific term that is used as an instance of that general meaning. ثم وضع لفظة من وإلى لمصادقهما الجزئية. So to make it even more clear, imagine you're thinking about the general meaning of insan, and then you're pointing to Zayd and Amr. Zayd and Amr are not words that mean insan, but rather they are instances of that general meaning. They are specific terms to refer to that general meaning. The same applies to al-ma'ani al-harfiyya, the prepositional meanings. So with the third, what we are considering is a general meaning, but we are designating specific words that act as instances of that general meaning. You know, the word min is not designated to mean al-ibtida. It's designated as an instance of ibtida, and hence I can use it specifically when I speak about my journey from Basra to Baghdad. Now, وإن كان الملحوظ خاصا ووضع اللفظ للجامع بين هذا الخاص والفرد الآخر فهو من القسم الرابع. Sometimes, so the fourth type of designation is when I consider a specific meaning, and then I designate a universal, I designate a universal term to refer to both the particular individual and another particular individual. This is of the fourth type. Now again, just because we have four categories of designation, it doesn't mean that all of them are possible and actually occur. There is no doubt. So here he says, المعروف إمكان الأولين ووقوعهما في عالم الوضع. He says what is known and what is established is the possibility of the first and the second and its occurrence. So the first type of وضع, where الوضع خاص والموضوع له الخاص, not only is that possible, but it occurs, because we see the usage of proper names. You consider a specific meaning and you designate a specific word for that specific meaning. That's possible and it occurs. The second type was you consider a general meaning and you designate a word to refer to that general meaning. That is possible. There's nothing logically impossible about that, and it also occurs. Right? As they say, أدل دليل على وقوع الشيء على إمكان أدل دليل على إمكان الشيء وقوعه. The best evidence for the possibility of something is its occurrence. It occurred, so obviously it's going to be possible. وإمكان الثالث. The scholars of Usul, they say the third type is also possible, and some would argue, if you believe in al-ma'ani al-harfiyya, if you believe in prepositional meanings, where the word min, for example, it doesn't have any independent meaning. It's not like ibtida, where ibtida has an independent meaning. Min acts as a connector, right? It acts as a connector. It's a specific designation that acts as an instance of that general meaning. وَإِنَّمَا الْبَحْثُ فِي وُقُوعِهِ. So when it comes to the third type, there's no doubt that it's possible. The discussion is about whether it occurs or not. And وَقَدْ عَرَفْتَ أَنَّ الْوَضْعَ فِي الْحُرُوفِ مِنْ هَذَا الْقَبِيلِ. And you know that, and we've understood, that designation, the designation of prepositions is of the third type. إنما الكلام في إمكان الرابع فضلا عن وقوعه. The real debate here is whether or not it is possible to consider a specific meaning and then assign a general term. Is that possible? فالمشهور استحالة الرابع. What is mashhur, what is well known among the ulama of the scholars of Usul al-Fiqh, is that it is the fourth type of designation is impossible. It's impossible to consider a specific meaning and then you coin a general term. Why? فيقع الكلام فيما هو الفرق بين الثالث حين قيل بإمكانه والرابع حيث قيل بامتناعه. So here is, once one would ask, how is it possible that the third how is it possible that the third type of designation is possible while the fourth type of designation is not possible? ووجهه, the explanation for this, أن الملحوظ العام في القسم الثالث. In the third type of designation, what we were considering, the meaning that we were considering was general. له قابلية الحكاية عن مصادقه وجزئياته. When you consider a general meaning has the potential, it has the ability to have instances. So for example, when you consider the meaning of ibtida, it's a general meaning, you can have specific instances of that general meaning. When you consider the meaning of a general meaning like insan, Zayd, Amr, Bakr, they are all masadiq. They are all specific instances. They are instances of that general meaning. فللواضع أن يتصور مفهوم الابتداء والانتهاء ويضع اللفظ لمصادقهما التي تحكي عنها مفاهيمهما. So it's possible for someone to consider the general meaning of beginning and end, and then devise and designate specific prepositions that refer to that general meaning. وَهَذَا بِخِلَافِ الرَّابِعِ, and this is the opposite of the fourth type of designation. فَإِنَّ الْمَلْحُوظَ لِأَجْلِ تَشَخُّصِهِ بِخُصُوصِيَّاتٍ يَكُونُ خَاصًا. When it comes to the fourth type of designation, what we are considering in our minds is something specific that is individuated, that has particular qualities. ليست له قابلية الحكاية عن الجامع بين الأفراد. When you're considering something that is specific, what that means is it does not have the ability to refer to a collection of individuals. It lacks the ability. So if I'm thinking about a specific meaning, if what I'm considering is specific, the term that I designate has to refer to that specific. I cannot designate a general term to refer to that specific, because that general term is going to refer to other than what I am considering. وهذا بخلاف الرابع فإن الملحوظ لأجل تشخصه بخصوصيات يكون خاصا ليست له قابلية الحكاية عن الجامع بين الأفراد. When you're considering a specific meaning, it doesn't have the ability to include something that is universal. حتى يوضع اللفظ بإزائه. Because what you're considering is specific, you can't say that, this the general term that I designate is going to refer to other than that individuated thing that came to your mind. وبالجملة العام يصلح لأن يكون مرآة لمصادقه الواقعة تحته. وبالجملة, meaning to summarize, العام, what is general, يصلح لأن يكون مرآة لمصادقه الواقعة تحته. What is general has the ability, it has the potential to act as a mirror for its specific instances. ولكن الخاص, but when it comes to a specific meaning, لأجل تضيقه وتقيده, a particular meaning, because of its conceptual limitation, it cannot reflect any instantation or individual other than itself. So if I'm thinking about Zayd, a very specific individual, the term that I coin cannot refer to anyone other than this specific meaning because of its conceptual limitation. ولكن الخاص لأجل تضيقه وتقيده. So a particular meaning, because of its conceptual limitation, it cannot reflect any instances of that meaning or individual other than itself, and therefore لا يصلح أن يكون مرآة للجامع بينه وبين فرد آخر. So because of this, it cannot combine within itself its own reality and the reality of another individual, because what you are considering is specific. So how can it be that what you are considering is specific and you want to coin a term that is what you're considering is specific. It doesn't have the ability to reflect anything other than itself because of its conceptual limitation. Now, تقسيم الوضع بحسب اللفظ الموضوع. Now here we come to the next section, and this is still under section 3 on the topic of designation. Classifying designation according to the kind of word being considered. Now, in the previous section, we were speaking about the different types of designation based on the meaning that we were considering. Here, we are classifying وضع based on the kind of word that we are designating. ثم إنما مر كان تقسيما للوضع حسب المعنى. ثم إنما مر كان تقسيما للوضع حسب المعنى. The designation that we spoke about. So above, we classify designation from the perspective of the word's meaning, the ma'na. وثم تقسيم آخر له حسب اللفظ الموضوع إلى شخصي ونوعي. We can also classify designation according to whether the word being designated is individual, if it's shakhsi, or it is نوعي, or it is categorical. فإذا كان اللفظ الموضوع متصورا بشخص فيكون الوضع شخصيا. If the word that we are designating, not the meaning, we're not thinking about that. If the word that we are designating, if it is specific, then this is known as specific or individual designation. So if the word being designated is conceived of in relation to a particular individual, then the designation is of the individual kind. It's shakhsi. الوضع الشخصي. Like what? كتصور لفظ زيد بشخصي. It's like when you have the term Zayd, and the term Zayd refers to a specific individual. This is shakhsi. وأما إذا كان متصورا بوجهه وعنوانه فيكون الوضع نوعيا. On the other hand, if the designated word is conceived of as a general category, then it is a categorical designation. Now, what do we mean by this? He gives an example. كهيئة الفعل الماضي التي هي موضوعة لانتساب الفعل إلى الفاعل في الزمان الماضي. Now, when we designate the word Zayd for the individual Zayd, this is an individual designation. Zayd is a specific designation. Now, sometimes when we are designating words, we don't designate a specific word. We designate a form, a hay'a. So in the Arabic language, the form of a past tense verb is fa'ala. Now, when we're designating and we're creating, when we're designating words, what is being designated is this form, fa'ala. Fa'ala basically means that this particular action was performed in the past by the doer. The hay'a has been designated. This is a categorical designation. So the word daraba, fataha, nasara, these are not words that were individually designated. They are following that categorical designation. They're following the pattern of fa'ala. So fa'ala is a designation of a form, but it's not referring to specific instances. It's a general cast. It's a general structure that has been designated. And whenever you want to refer to an action that someone performed in the past, you follow that form. Kataba, nasara. ضرب. So what was designated was not, it's not that we went to each and every word and we say, okay, ضرب means that he performed the action of ضرب in the past. And then we go to نصر and we say, نصر means that he performed. It didn't happen that way. What was designated was not نصر ضرب فتح. What was designated was the form of فعل الماضي. فتح, فعل. So فعل, which is a categorical designation, that was designated. So sometimes words are individually designated, and sometimes there's a categorical designation whereby other words are plugged into it to convey the meaning of that categorical designation. ولكن الموضوع ليس الهيئة الشخصية في ضرب أو نصر. What was designated wasn't the specific word ضرب, he hit, or نصر, he helped. بل مطلق هيئة فعل. What was designated was the form, the pattern of فعل. في أي مادة من المواد تحققت. It's up to you to put in whatever word that you want to put in. فتح, ضرب, نصر, كتب, ركض. What was designated was the cast, the form, the structure. وبذلك يعلم أن وضع الهيئة في الفاعل والمفعول والمفعال هو نوعي لا شخصي. Therefore, when you look at the designation of the form فاعل, فاعل is also a categorical designation. It's نوعي. So what is designated is this pattern, فاعل. Then you have the word ضارب, كاتب, قاتل. These, so we didn't designate each and every single one of these words, but what was designated was the pattern of fa'il, which indicates the doer of the action. ضارب is the one who did the hitting. Katib was the one who did the writing. So the designation of the pattern or the form of fa'il is a categorical designation, as opposed to Zayd and Amr. These are individual designations. They refer to specific individuals. They have a specific meaning. They refer to specific individuals. The same thing comes with maf'ul. Maf'ul is also وضع نوعي. It's a categorical designation because maf'ul means the object, the recipient of the action. مضروب, مكتوب, منصور. So this is known as categorical designation. Whenever you use maf'ul, you are basically highlighting that this is the object of the action. This is the recipient of the action. What was designated was not the individual word mansur and madrub. What was designated was the categorical word, which is maf'ul. And mif'al is ism ala, miftah, misbah. So what was designated were not the individual words, but rather the form was designated, and you simply plug in these words into these forms. And this is known as al-wad'u al-naw'i. So we have wad'u shakhsi, we have individual designation, where a word is designated for something specific, and then where it's an individual designation, and then you have a categorical designation, al-wad'u al-naw'i, and we gave the example of fa'ala, fa'il, maf'ul, and mif'al, and the various other patterns that you learn in the science of sarf. The fourth section of the book is الأمر الرابع تقسيم الدلالة إلى تصورية وتصديقية. This is where we're going to speak about conceptual and assentive signification. We'll leave that for our next session, inshallah. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين.